The optic was just terrible. A black boy dead in the street, shot by a white policeman. It was 4.5 hours before they finally removed the body. It pointed to a terrible America in which, on a given August afternoon, a young black American male could be shot dead as he no more than walked down the street.
Like that. I mean, you know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate? You know how many black men graduate?
This was an execution. This was an assassination. What are we fighting for?
I don't want y'all killing my child because she walked out the door. Y'all having a bad day. Move out the way, motherfucker.
I don't know fully what happened, nor do you.
Our hearts are out there.
Police brutality against African Americans is rising.
Oh. We can't have people fearful.
We can't have police officers killing people.
I don't look like I'm putting my thumb on the scales one way or the other.
Missouri is the new Mississippi.
We have determined there is cause for the Justice Department to open an investigation.
Everybody want me to be calm. Do you know how them bullets hit my son?
No probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson.
Burn this motherfucker out! Burn this bitch down!
But what was more remarkable than the tragedy itself was the explosion of controversy that surrounded it. Black militants of every stripe, national black leaders, politicians, mainstream media, cable news, even the President and Attorney General of the United States all became players in the Ferguson story. Yet in Chicago, my hometown, in the year 2016, 762 young blacks were shot and killed. 3,000 were wounded, largely by gunfire from other young blacks. All this killing, all this loss of life, did not garner as much attention as the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. I have studied and thought about race all my life. I was born on the south side of Chicago to parents who met and married in the civil rights movement of the early 1940s. One of my earliest memories is of my parents leading a year-long boycott of my segregated school in the 1950s, the first such boycott north of the Mason-Dixon line. Civil rights activism was my family's mission. This background positioned me to know one overriding truth: that we human beings never use race except as a means to power. Race is never an end, it is always a means, and it has no role in human affairs except as a corruption. Whenever racial issues break into the news, I am usually overcome by what I call race fatigue. So on that August evening when the shooting of Michael Brown hit the news, it was as if America was staging a play I'd already seen. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. It threatened to show me out as one of those confused, self-hating Uncle Toms that kidded themselves into believing that racial oppression was effectively over with. This was heresy, and I had become identified with it. Yet here was Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager shot dead by a white cop. Hard to argue in the face of this, that blacks have at last achieved the freedom to live as individuals. And yet, this is what I argue. Was it really racism that killed Michael Brown? In many ways, my life as an American has been a journey through various racial landscapes. That journey continues. When I first heard of East St. Louis, it was said to be the poorest black city in America. There was almost a braggadocio in this that lent excitement to the name. I was proud to work here for 3 years in the late 60s as a warrior in President Johnson's war on poverty. I wanted to stop here on my visit to Ferguson just to look around. I was a black militant back then. This was the era of Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael, and I was a part of that. I identified with that. My fellow poverty workers and I had come here in a mood of wild hopefulness. America had essentially confessed the evil of its racist past. The government that had oppressed us only yesterday would now engineer our uplift. I felt that justice in America was finally unfolding before me, and that my work in these programs was the actual execution of justice. But in my first year of teaching, 2 of my brightest students were shot and killed. The trigger fingers were black. Life went on. Back then, I had no cynicism about justice. It was the word that had animated the civil rights movement more than any other. But after 3 years in East St. Louis, I no longer trusted the word. It hid more than it revealed, and left too much room for corruption. The colleague I shared an office with met his literature class only once a month, claiming his students learned more in the streets than in books. Yet we had just won a $20,000 federal grant in 1960s money to start a library for our students. Black development was not the focus of justice. Taking advantage of white guilt was the focus.
Everyone knew everyone, and it had a Mayberry feeling about it.
Ferguson is just a continuation of a disenfranchisement of the African American community.
This was not what I expected, given the media's treatment of Ferguson. I thought it would look like an extension of East St. Louis. But this was charming, even bucolic.
I just don't want to hear it. We're racist. We'd been living with black people for...
We were not part of white flight.
No.
What I didn't realize is that over a mile away, on a parallel street, was another Ferguson. The Ferguson where the shooting took place.
Ferguson is a microcosm of this country.
For some, it is a friendly, integrated suburb of St. Louis. For others, after the death of Michael Brown, it is the new capital of American racism.
That Mike Brown Jr. was a soul, but someone undecided named Darren Wilson that his life wasn't worth it.
Today is the 4th anniversary of Michael Brown's death.
People don't understand the pain that we go through. I deal with a lot of demons out here. My life is upside down. I walk around here, I try to smile. I try not to show nobody I got so much hate and anger in my soul because I don't want nobody to think that I'm just this angry man walking this earth.
But as the day went on, it became more of a protest. They protested the Ferguson market, where Brown fought with the owner just before his death. The store agreed to virtually all the demands. But the protesters then changed their minds.
Can I walk without you being in my motherfucking face?
At the Ferguson City Council meeting, they demanded that the market be shut down or given over to them altogether.
I am gonna stand out there until that store is over. And if you don't do your job, man, we're gonna do it for you. Not a threat, a promise.
But there was something unconvincing about all these protests. The anger seemed ritualized, almost choreographed. This is the rectangle of asphalt that marks the spot where Michael Brown's body lay for so long. Why is it so hard to see the truth here?
I seen Mike Brown and his friend walking down the street closer to the curb, not on the sidewalk. And my initial thought was, wow, that is a big guy right there.
21, put me on Canfield, with 2 and send me to our car.
I just seen Mike Brown inside the police officer's window, and it appeared as if some sort of confrontation was taking place.
It looked like they was going at it, because I could see the young man, I could see him hitting at the policeman, and the policeman, as far as I could tell, he was going like this, and it looked like he was going for his gun.
He backed away from the car, and he was standing there for a minute, and then he took off running.
And my initial thought was that, wow, did I just witness this young guy kill a police officer?
The officer had got out of his truck and he had his gun down to his side like that.
He had his gun drawn and it was down to his side.
The police officer exited his vehicle with his weapon drawn, pursuing Mike Brown.
He is running behind and yelling stop, and he did not fire at Michael while he was running away.
I didn't see him fire. I didn't even hear gunshots until later. He just threw his hands up and he turned around and he kind of put his hands down. And he was like shuffling. He was just shuffling back and forth.
He looked like he was going to raise his hands at one point, but he didn't.
I can't say for sure what sort of body gesture. I can't fully recall. All I know is it's not a motion of surrendering, putting my hands up or anything.
Michael was shuffling back and forth like he was confused, and then he started running.
Immediately after he did his body gesture, he came for force. Full charge at the officer.
His hands were balled up. He has his arms bent towards his chest, and he's running like, almost like a tackle running.
I heard him say, "Get down," about 2 or 3 times.
I probably would have shot him instantly if you charge at me like that. But when he was running back, he was screaming, "Stop, stop," and the officer was backing up as he kept coming closer to him, and he didn't stop.
I heard 3 shots. Well, I think it was 3.
I thought he was missing him because me thinking if you get shot, you're going to go down.
I don't know how many times he shot him, although altogether, but like you seen one of the bullets hit him in his face because you seen like the splatter from it.
Think about it. If you came out one of these doors and saw the body of Michael Brown, what would you think? Groups pass on their identity to their young by telling cautionary tales. Watch out for tales. For blacks, watch out for whites. So if you're black and you see Brown's body, there is already a framework of meaning in place. You don't think so much as step into that meaning. And at that moment, before any evidence or witness testimony, all you can see is a victim of American racism.
Do you see a knife? Do you see anything that would have caused a threat to these motherfucking police officers? They shot that boy because they wanted you.
No reason. He's on the ground and still shot.
Said he had his hands up and everything, they still shot him. He fell on the ground, they stood over and shot him some more.
The saddest part is that if you would just told them at first what happened, then you would not get 50 million opinions. The devil start working in people's minds. So now it looked like it's racist. Now it's only looking like it's happening to the black people. And then after Mike Brown shooting, then everybody started getting shot all around the whole entire country.
He shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the air, and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots.
A young man died before his time because of brutality from a different race. It's racial profiling.
We had got the news that someone had gotten shot. We continued our meeting. People getting shot all the time, so it's, you know, it's no longer an alarming issue. But when the meeting was over and we left and drove up to Chambers, we noticed a long line of cars and a police car on the back of a tow truck.
White cop, black kid, absolutely, race played a significant part of the reaction.
The story of Ferguson was quickly shaped by what I call poetic truth. This is a distortion of the actual truth that we use to sue for leverage and power in the world. It is a partisan version of reality, a storyline that we put forward to build our case. For example, that Michael Brown was executed is a poetic truth.
Put your hands all the way up. I want your hands all the way up. Because this is how he was when he got shot, when he got assassinated, when he got executed. This is how it was. So we gotta do it like this. Let's keep it real.
He put his hands up and the police officer shot him. 4 or 5 people told me that's when I started the hands up, don't shoot right there.
Black people don't see that as a justified action, don't see that, hey, he was rushing the cop. Michael Brown's DNA is on the cop's gun, is on the window. You know, everything points out that he tried to attack this cop. But there are people that still think that Darren Wilson murdered him.
He got out the car, bro, dude on his knees like this, like, bro, don't shoot me, bro, don't shoot me. Dude, shot him dead in the head, bro. Then walked up to his body, shot him 4 more times, looked at his eyes, paused for a minute, shot him 4 more times.
There was simply no way to not have an opinion on what happened in Ferguson. And there was almost no way not to be swept up in the wave. That's how powerful it was. Not affirmatively expressing your support for Black Lives Matter almost led to suspicion.
Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot.
He had his hands in the air. What is it that you understand that happened to your grandson?
He went down to his knees and he held his hands up in the air. And the officer continued, got his back and continued shooting him, which makes it the execution.
Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up.
If you want answers, throw your arms up. Yeah. Because that's the sign Michael was using. Running around digging up, trying to act like he had a gang sign. No, he had a surrender sign.
I know that emotions are raw right now in Ferguson, and there are certainly passionate differences about what has happened.
If you had been wondering when the events in Ferguson were going to shift from a local story getting some national coverage to being a full-on national story, well, this might be it.
Everyone was now involved in a homicide. The average citizen was now involved in a homicide. The media was now involved in a homicide. Police were involved in a homicide. You now had skin in the game. Everybody had skin in the game.
But what was the game people had skin in. The game was essentially a competition between the poetic truth and the objective truth. The poetic truth argued that America was so intractably racist, it would execute an unarmed black teen for merely jaywalking. This was the America that hands up, don't shoot was meant to protest. Poetic truth always conflates the present with the past. It overlays the present with an imagery of past racial persecution.
The killing of Michael Brown, the state-sanctioned killing of Michael Brown, there was a blatant disrespect for the body of this black boy that was reminiscent to Emmett Till.
As one minister said to me, he said, it was almost like this back in slavery. It's like they left the body out there as a warning for us.
The treatment of Michael Brown by law enforcement in front of the whole world had the same impact of watching Bull Connor in Birmingham, Alabama, when he pulled those hoses.
You can never whip these boys if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham.
It functions as a tyranny, thriving more by coercion than reason. If whites argue with it, they're shamed as racists. If blacks argue, they're shamed as Uncle Toms.
The media couldn't wait to say, look at this 67% African-American town with a white Republican mayor, 85% Democrat. What's going on? They made me feel like I was, this was South Africa. It felt like this was apartheid.
Some professionals, some elderly minorities didn't feel that Mike Brown was right for what happened. They felt that he went in the store, he did a certain thing, and this was the repercussion of it.
If an African-American person was seen talking to the police or their story lined up closer to how Darren Wilson's story was, they were like thrown out of their race.
Poetic truth, always on the run from objective truth, colors the Ferguson of today with its racist past. It ignores Ferguson's thriving black middle class and its ongoing commitment to integration.
You would hear people talk about the white racist Ferguson residents, and you wanted to say, well, do you mean the people that partook in white flight and left 20 years ago? Because you can go back far enough in Ferguson, and at one point, this city was entirely white, and it was called a sundowner city. African Americans had to be out, before sundown, like many communities in the United States. And Ferguson consciously embraced the change. They started an organization in the 70s called Proud to try and talk about racial issues. And so Ferguson really became kind of a destination city for successful African Americans.
Certainly the optics of tanks and dogs in today's Ferguson invoked images of the 60s, implying that the black struggle against oppression is never ending.
They bring tanks, and they're gonna shoot us down like animals.
We are from here!
By forcing everyone into roles echoing America's racist past, Poetic Truth set the stage for a power grab.
The Justice Department has opened an independent federal civil rights investigation into the death of Michael Brown.
It was the perfect storm for a lot of people and a lot of organizations.
The Attorney General himself will be traveling to Ferguson on Wednesday to meet.
Let's come to St. Louis. We bring your wood with you. There's a fire going on, and there's opportunity for it to turn into a bonfire.
He will also be meeting with other leaders in the community whose support is so critical.
Eric Holder had an opportunity to meet with myself and Ferguson officials, and we were told not to be there. Well, the irony is he met with the African-American mayors around Ferguson. It was at that point that I knew our community wasn't going to get a fair shake.
And I met with some of the youngsters. And I said to them, we're going to try to get the Justice Department to come in here. One of the young men said to me, Shelly, Yeah, I understand that, Reverend Allen. You're right. Yes, the department may be able to do something, but we can't talk to the man. Street law, we can't talk to the man. And I looked at him and I said, have you seen Eric Holder? We are the man now.
Eric Holder came here in response to the death of Michael Brown and said he is the top law enforcement officer. But then he waded into the politics of race by saying, but I'm also coming as a black man.
When Mr. Holder came to town and declared, I'm coming here as a black man, okay, your agenda's already set.
It automatically sends a signal that Obama administration has taken sides against the police officer and against truth.
Eric Holder came to Ferguson as an envoy of black power, but there was no evidence of white racism in the shooting of Michael Brown. So where did Holder get the momentum to go forward? I think it came from white guilt. Since the 60s, whites have lived under the accusation that they are racist. Thus, there is a compulsion to prove their innocence of racism. This compulsion is white guilt. It is not actual guilt, but the terror of being seen as a racist. More than anything, Holder's mission to Ferguson was to exploit white guilt. He needed victims and he needed racists.
President Obama was under a lot of pressure from the Al Sharpton and the Reverend Jesse Jackson types to show some quote-unquote backbone, find a crime.
Today, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a broad investigation.
People consistently express concerns stemming from specific alleged incidents, from general policing practices, and from the lack of diversity.
A grand jury is already investigating last month's shooting. This new federal probe will go far beyond that.
What did register with Holder was the escalating violence in Ferguson itself. It was clear that there was an audience for black rage. This rage was something that white Americans had learned to buy their way out of. Holder, therefore, made common cause with the protesters to transform an isolated tragedy into a social injustice.
My wife, my kids, they began these candlelight visuals. That's how it really started in Ferguson for Mike Brown. It was visuals.
A peaceful vigil and demonstration last night turned into rioting and looting of stores.
But as it persisted, there were like a national fervor that started to move into our city.
You had people that, state senators and representatives and activists who were legitimately protesting during the day and in the early night. But what you'd have their movement was corrupted by the outsiders that were coming in and throwing Molotov cocktails.
I would say close to over 90% were in from outside. 90%. Over 90%.
It's becoming a nightly routine here in Ferguson, arresting 31 people, saying many of them were from out of state.
So some 32 people being arrested in Ferguson Sunday night, and the interesting part, none of them are from Ferguson.
It turned into a frenzy, if you will, of different people. It wasn't just about Mike Brown Jr. It wasn't just about justice. Everybody was feeling like this is a free-for-all to get your grievances out.
The protesters were just in a rage and cussing and screaming and spitting at the police, this line of police that just had to keep a stoic face and were threatening to follow the officers home and rape their wives and daughters.
About 10 o'clock at night, there would be, the protesters were out walking, and then around 10 or 10:05 as the news came on, all of a sudden these groups would swarm. And the more that came, the more TV cameras came, the more people, and it really kind of fed on itself.
And then we would be, once again, displayed as a racist, horrible city.
In King's day, protest appealed to the honor of Americans. In Holder's day, it manipulates their guilt.
If you get hurt, you get gas in your eyes. The word was, go to Greater St. Mark. And the protesters had not had a place, a home base, if you will, to come and to set up, the movement would not have lasted as long as it lasted. They wanted justice for Michael Brown and the Brown family. That's the first thing. Now, there were, almost everybody had their perspective of what that justice should look like. And so we can't control that. There were a lot of different groups and they were not organized together.
The methods they use to fight seem like something a kid does when he's between the ages of 2 and 3. I can't rationally talk to you. I can't agree to disagree with you, but I can spit, bite, and kick you because I'm a toddler. So these young people took that approach. You will not listen to us, so we're gonna blow up your buildings, we're gonna burn things down.
Who wanna take the time to break down racism from a philosophical level. Y'all did not show up. I don't care about how it looked. It ain't made for TV. This ain't your daddy's civil rights movement. This ain't your daddy's civil rights movement. And they wanna know.
Even in the back day, they did this. But they did it differently to get an answer. But this generation here feel like somebody owed them something. We want this, we want that, we want a board of this, we want a board of that. Okay, and grant you, in the day, and I gotta keep going back to the day, because when I heard somebody say F Dr. Martin Luther King, I was through.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Turn me around. Turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking. Marching up to freedom. Turn me around.
That's what I say. I support Hamas, 100%.
Does not look like this?
I am with them, just like I'm against you. Fuck you.
Turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Segregation, turn me around, turn me around.
Don't talk if you won't be ready.
Back up, back up.
Yeah.
Keep on walking, keep on talking. Turn me around, keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
We want to know the real story for Mike Brown. We do. Everybody does. Okay? But right now the story is he shot my son. That's the story. Okay? But here's the thing. It went from there to personal stuff. It went from there to personal gain. It went from there to personal money.
That's how the movement broke up. When, I can't think of this man's name now, but he was New York. He sent $1 million out here to different organizations, and the kids got a wind of the money, and they went haywire.
And this money is not going to go to this young man's family, and it's not going to go to the community. So
where was the money coming from?
everybody poured in to Ferguson when this happened, from all over the United States, all over the world.
But some of the stuff people be asking is unreasonable.
Like what?
We want you to expunge all our tickets. This ain't got nothing to do with your ticket. This got something to do with a black boy being killed.
A lot of organizations were startups, and they used this property to start their organization. They were getting money. There was a group called Hope and Change, or Center for Hope and Change. They got some money, and I didn't find out until later. But they got to fighting over that money in the front of the church. Back in the day when you protested, you could be shot, you were hanged. If you will notice, out of all of the police, all of the military equipment that were down there on West Florissant, not one person lost their life.
that Michael Brown does not want to be remembered for a riot. He wants to be remembered as the one that made America deal with how we gonna police in the United States.
The only reason we know about Eric Garner or Trayvon or Michael Brown is because they were protesting. Protest is not only viable, it is necessary, because if you cannot arrest public attention, you cannot move the public toward change.
We see Michael laying on the ground. America, it's time to deal with policing.
When Holder came to Ferguson, declaring himself to be a black man, he followed a formula of power that Al Sharpton, among others, had developed a generation earlier.
That my son and his 3 companions were at the wrong place at the wrong time. That from 25 to 30 young white youths with baseball bats attacked it. One youth had a gun. My son happened to be the one in line to fire.
My son will never turn this corner again. No, he won't. Only because of this, the pigment of his skin.
30 years ago, I interviewed a young Al Sharpton. It was on the occasion of another black teen's death in Bensonhurst, New York. There was no ambiguity in Yusuf Hawkins' murder. It was white racism, plain and simple. He was not interested in only justice. The murderers were convicted of their crimes and locked up. What struck me then was how Al Sharpton used the limelight to bring past victimization into the present. It wasn't just Yusuf Hawkins who was killed. It was thousands of blacks over the centuries. The weight of all that history was meant to be the measure of justice due today. Eric Holder followed this same formula with policing in Ferguson. It wasn't just Darren Wilson who pulled the trigger. It was thousands of officers dating back to the oppressions of slavery and segregation. The weight of all that history was the measure of systemic racism today.
As soon as you hear of a police officer involved shooting, it's national news. It's all over your phones. But 2 people kill each other, nobody cares. We care because we have to go investigate it. I have to go tell that loved one's mother, you just lost your 18-year-old son. That's not an easy thing to do.
Holder took Sharpton's formula up a notch. The iconic Michael Brown would become the face of police reform in America. And the name Ferguson itself would embody the shame of racism. On the ground, back in the real Ferguson, the picture was more complex, less incriminating.
Once what was notoriously known as white flight occurred, and everyone started moving away from the city, it left these apartment complexes able to be bought up by speculators, came in and bought up houses and made them Section 8 housing. Now you have people living there who don't have the money to pay the fines. It leads to a situation to where they can't pay the fine, so they don't pay the fine. Then they get pulled over again. There's a warrant. That much I will agree with Mr. Holder that the community couldn't afford to do it, to pay the fines. But I'm fairly certain that the Ferguson police, nor any other police department, are responsible for the failure to recognize the problems with putting a bunch of disenfranchised people together, regardless of race. Poverty is a damning thing. I think that if you're poor and you're black, and the only time you see the police is when somebody's going to jail or something's bad is happening, and if all the adults are telling you that they're doing this to you because you're black, what stick would you have to measure by to think something other than that? I can tell you, as someone raised in a poor white neighborhood, when the police came to our house, it wasn't good news either.
I don't know how long the investigation will be. I don't know how long the journey will be. But I know how this story gonna end. The first will be last. The last will be first. The lion and the lamb gonna lay down together. And God will make a way for his children. I've been to the end of the book. Justice is gonna come. Justice is gonna come. Justice gonna come.
But does Reverend Sharpton's justice apply to Darren Wilson, the police officer who shot Michael Brown? For Sharpton, the word justice implies a reckoning, some definitive achievement of fairness. Is there to be a reckoning for Darren Wilson?
See your hands. As you know, some of the eyewitnesses have said at that moment when he turned around and put his hands up.
That would be incorrect.
No way?
No way.
So you say he starts to run, does a stutter step, starts to come towards you, and?
At that time, I gave myself another mental check. Can I shoot this guy? Legally, can I? And the question I answered myself was, I have to. If I don't, he will kill me if he gets to me. He's already overpowered me once. If he gets to me, I will not survive.
Even though he's, 35, 40 feet away?
Once he's come in that direction, if he hasn't stopped yet, when's he gonna stop?
So you've already fired twice. He starts to come towards you.
After he's coming at me and I decide to shoot, I fired a series of shots and paused.
What did you see?
I noticed at least one of them hit him. I don't know where, but I saw his body kind of just flinch a little. And after that, I paused and I again yelled, stop, get on the ground, giving him the opportunity to stop. And he ignored all the commands and he just kept running. And so after he kept running again, I shot another series of shots. And at least one of those hit him because I saw the flinch. And he stopped. I stopped and I said, get on the ground, get on the ground. Well, this time he's about 15 feet away. So I start backpedaling because he's just getting too close and he's still not stopping after.
You were backpedaling?
Yes, away from him. Because I was like, he's already running through these shots. I mean, they weren't phasing him. It didn't matter to him. And he was looking through me. The face and the image he was presenting was just, I wasn't even there.
What did you see in that face?
Just aggression. There was nothing. It was like hollow, just looking through me. And as he gets to that 15 feet after I fired the second round of shots, he gets to about 8 to 10 feet. And as he does that, he kind of starts to lean forward like he's going to tackle me. And 8 to 10 feet is close. I mean, if he's going to tackle me, he's going to tackle me at that point. And I looked down my barrel of my gun and I fired, and what I saw was his head, and that's where it went.
Right in the top of his head?
Yes.
Some witnesses have also said that they actually saw you stand over him and shoot in the top of his head.
That'd be incorrect.
The Brown family came out with a statement last night where they said, "We are profoundly disappointed that the killer of our child will not face the consequences of his actions." What do you think when you hear that?
I think those are grieving parents who are mourning the loss of their son.
What do you want to say to them?
I'm sorry their son had to lose his life.
And it had to be?
Had to.
I don't believe racism drove Darren Wilson to shoot Michael Brown. I think the motive was so simple as to be almost unbelievable. He feared for his life.
87-page report documenting our findings and our conclusions that the facts do not support the filing of criminal charges against Officer Darren Wilson.
The DOJ's investigation, quote, forced me to deal with two uncomfortable truths. Brown never surrendered with his hands up, and Wilson was justified in shooting Brown.
Fellow African Americans called me a, quote, sellout or a, quote, house Negro. Others said I did it because I wanted, quote, white people to like me, or that I, quote, did it for the money. No, I didn't. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And like Judd, such taunts won't...
But things were not so simple for Mr. Holder. As the envoy for Black Power, he had to erect a complex edifice of Justice Department protocols, civil rights laws, and media spins, all in the service of the poetic truth that racial persecution remains the greatest problem for Black Americans.
Today, this investigation found a community that was deeply polarized, a community where local authorities consistently approached law enforcement not as a means for protecting public safety, but as a way to generate revenue.
So how do you argue that racism explains the death of Michael Brown when there is not a shred of evidence to support that claim? You point to a gap between the races, and then you claim that only racism explains that gap and nothing else. You claim that racism has a will of its own.
No other basis. Between October 2012 and October 2014, despite making up only 67% of the population, African Americans accounted for a little over 85% of all traffic stops by the Ferguson Police Department.
A Washington attorney who contacted me, he and his firm had done a lot of work in the issues of disparities and how they used disparate impact. And he told me, he said, if they can't make this racial, there's nothing they can do. There's nothing the government can do about me pulling over a ton of white people and writing them tickets until they're blue. But if you're doing it because their race, now suddenly the government has a reason to be involved.
Ferguson is not an island, and therefore their stats don't work at all.
Ferguson is a community that's integrated, but our surrounding neighboring communities are predominantly African American, 90%, 95%. But they said Ferguson's 67% African American, but we pull over 80% of our motorists are African American.
Statistically, who do you think is driving down the roads?
People from all over this area come to Sam's because there is no grocery stores, no Walmarts, nothing in North St. Louis City, and every one of those people come to Ferguson to shop.
Our review of the evidence found no alternative explanation for the disproportionate impact on African American residents other than implicit and explicit racial bias. No other basis.
If they don't turn this into an issue of race, then they don't have a case.
The people in that community are no better off than they were prior to the death of this young Black child. They're no better off, and everybody knows it.
The changes in itself validates they had reason to protest. Maybe their methods of protest, some that got violent, were wrong. But clearly they were addressing something that needed change, otherwise it wouldn't have started to change.
Let's be clear. As much as Ferguson not only cost Ferguson, but as much as Ferguson cost this country, because there was responses to Ferguson, protests, and across this country, people expended dollars. If you were to calculate what it cost this country, what did we get? What did the country get in return? What did Ferguson get in return? And I say nothing. I say nothing.
Failing even to charge Darren Wilson, Holder made Ferguson pay the price for a racist murder that was neither racist nor a murder. One of the words most commonly associated with the Black American experience is the word justice.
To this day, there are people who blame Ferguson Market for Michael Brown's death. Michael Brown had tried to buy cigarillos the night before. with pot, with marijuana. And the store said, no, we don't deal in marijuana. Some people want to be angry at someone. The police chief changed. Tom Jackson, he went away, and the players all kind of went away. And now who is there to be angry at? Well, let's pick the store.
But what kind of justice did these protesters want? Eric Holder delivered his version of justice. The city and police department of Ferguson were placed under a federal consent decree. Beyond this, the Brown family received a reported $1.5 million settlement. The owners of the Ferguson market met almost all the protesters' original demands. But for these protesters, it was still not enough.
This is a family business. They came with little or nothing in their pockets. They have built up their store. They own a number of stores. That is the American dream, and they do this by working 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they do that for 15 or 20 years.
The poetic truth of black victimization had become their identity. In black anger and outrage, in protest, they found themselves.
Sadly, the interaction that some of the protesters have with the owners of the market, who happen to be Asian Indian, is absolutely based in race.
A protester got up at the podium and was speaking to the mayor and said, "These people do not belong here. They are not like you or me. They're not black or white. They're Pakistani and they need to go." They can get away with this. Why? I don't know, because it's Ferguson.
The poetic truth entrapped them in the idea that we blacks can win a payback from America that matches our long suffering in America. But this will never be. We will never gain an entitlement equal to our suffering. If it wasn't racism that killed Michael Brown, what was it? I believe Holder's investigation didn't go deep enough. The danger in poetic truth is that it always traps us into solving the wrong problem. Many argue that white supremacy and all the customs and bigotries it gave rise to, slavery, segregation, discrimination, and so on, are what led to Michael Brown's death. While those forces certainly played a role, wasn't it actually the new liberalism coming out of the 60s that shaped the world of Michael Brown? The enormously seductive power of post-60s liberalism was and is its promise to redeem and deliver us from the evils of white supremacy. This liberalism was so transformative that even many conservatives fell under its sway. Wasn't this liberalism far more focused on assuaging white guilt than on developing blacks? Back in the 60s, we blacks made a very bad deal with America. We demanded that America help us develop. But if this was logical, it was also naive. It seduced us into putting our fate right back into the hands of the same white America that had oppressed us in the first place. We began to live by a formula. America's racial guilt was our power. White guilt became black power. Of course, there was a catch. To milk white guilt, we had to always be victims of white racism. White racism and black victimization became the heart and soul of liberal power in America. During my time working in an East St. Louis poverty program, we were sometimes asked to take in a few teenagers from the infamous Pruitt-Igoe housing project. The mere request froze us in our tracks. Located in the heart of St. Louis, Pruitt-Igoe was already seen as a virtual dehumanization camp. Blacks were literally schooled in gang violence, drug trafficking, prostitution, gambling, and so on. None of those students chosen to join us ever showed up. This sort of behavior was new to me back then. I grew up in an America that offered no special support to blacks. Our fate was in our own hands, whether we liked it or not. I would have jumped at a chance to join a program like our program in East St. Louis. But the Pruitt-Igoe kids blew off what I, in an America indifferent to blacks, would have run to.
The first demand is that we have effective civil rights legislation, no compromise, no filibuster. What do you say?
In the politically charged 60s, the great cultural shift that separated their generation from mine was the advent of white guilt, the very engine of post-60s liberalism.
For Negro poverty is not white poverty. Many of its causes and many of its cures are the same. There are differences. For the Negro, they are a constant reminder of oppression. For the white, they are a constant reminder of guilt.
This was not actual guilt. Rather, it was the loss of moral authority and legitimacy incurred when America, in the mid-60s, finally admitted to its long indulgence in racism, sexism, and other bigotries. To win back moral authority, America took substantial responsibility for the advancement of its former victims, thereby lifting responsibility off the shoulders of people like the youth who never showed up. In this new era, the assuaging of white guilt became more important than black development. And this is how white guilt caused blacks to lose a degree of agency over their own fate, just as they began to experience real freedom.
There is a direct line from Pruitt-Igoe to Ferguson. Pruitt-Igoe is especially important. Its implosion on camera became an iconic moment in the history of public housing in America and the world. And it seemed to connote that this program, which was supposed to save poor people and keep them away from slums, replace slums, had actually failed. It was much bigger than housing. That's what people have to understand. It was much bigger than housing per se. This is not an overstatement to say that public housing was influenced by socialism. We can design an all-inclusive environment that was going to make your life better than you could make it yourself. There were the specific census tracts in St. Louis that were demolished to make way for Pruitt-Igoe were all occupied by poor black people or working class black people. They were organic black communities. Many of the houses that were torn down were owned by their occupants. They weren't owned by white slumlords and overseers.
Blacks arrived in St. Louis en masse from the South in the year 1900. Nearly all had nothing to their names. The national poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. Entirely on their own, blacks were moving up. Howard Husak's research shows that in 1950, 21% of all housing units in this neighborhood were the property of blacks. This number exceeded that of the adjacent white neighborhood by 3%. In this neighborhood, 23% of the homes had an owner present, and 460 out of 480 owners were black. Homes here were worth an average of $8,000, compared to the city-wide average of $9.2 thousand. Blacks were on the move upward, but the powers that ran St. Louis at the time did not see these properties the same way as blacks did, as low-rent opportunities to move up. They saw only slums. These powers were guilty of what's called the snapshot fallacy, the erroneous belief that conditions observed at a given moment are permanent, unless the government intervenes.
Everything is stagnant. Housing market isn't going to change. Their socioeconomic status isn't going to change. Therefore, we have to wipe that snapshot away and replace it with a gleaming new tower.
The government destroyed their equity and created a permanent black underclass. This happened all over America. My father, like many black men of the Great Migration from the South, wanted equity. Wow. Phoenix Village Hall. Wow. My parents spent a lot of time there on one issue or another. My mother started a baby clinic in the City Hall of Phoenix. 2nd Avenue, my Lord, let's see. That's the house. My mother and father had equity in that house. They built up through hard work and risk-taking. They learned to be electricians. They learned to be plumbers. They learned to be house painters. I can remember my mother on the roof of that house with tar paper, tarring it just before winter came in. They bought another house. We worked on that one. They sold it. They built up enough equity in this poor black community to see them through to the rest of their lives. I can remember when the idea of public housing began to be talked about in the 50s. And I can remember my father was instantly suspicious, did not like the idea, took it as something of a humiliation, the idea that the government would have to step in order for him to have a decent life. He did not like that idea. A man with nothing more than a 3rd grade education, a truck driver all of his life in the loop of Chicago. But he knew instinctively that these things were possibilities even in the midst of racial segregation everywhere, on our own block. Whites were on this side, we blacks were on that side. Did he say, oh my God, that's unfair and I'm gonna wait for a government program? No, the government had nothing to do with my family's really slow, gradual move upward in American life. The government was always a barrier, always something that's disbelieved in our agency, in our power to make a life.
What you saw was something more diabolical. Somewhere along the lines, you stopped valuing the minority community's you have to look at it like this. Slavery actually brought black people together. Don't condone it, shouldn't have happened. It was horrific. The Holocaust didn't last that long. But black families found a way to survive. So even when they migrated from the South to major metropolitan cities, those families were intact. When you tell a family your father can't be in the household, you take the leader of the household out.
Mom, the social worker's here.
The man in the house rule, which did so much to destroy the black family in America, was an attribute of aid to families with dependent children, welfare.
The government designed the program that if you're going to get the assistance you need, if you're a woman, you can't have a man in the house.
You're the gentleman that's been keeping company here.
Office of Equal Opportunity, OEO, set up offices all over New York, Chicago, and major cities that actually recruited people into the welfare system. Millions of black folks poured into the welfare system over the course of about 5 years. At a time when the unemployment rate in New York for black men was under 4%.
We know that children need a man in the house, a woman needs a man in the house. We don't insist people be married.
Do you mean you'd help a man move in if he's not married to the mother?
That's right.
That's immoral.
We're trying to deal with the realities.
What kind of example is that to set for the children?
Oh, what kind of example are you setting right now?
I ain't the government.
We'd love to see you get married.
Yeah, I'm hip you would. It would take the government off the hook and put me on.
The problem with that mentality is that you can actually, it keeps people in this box. And not all people. But whether we realize it or not, we do practice what we've seen. And you still see that mindset. Well, if I work this many hours, I won't be able to put my kid in daycare. I won't be able to get this assistance. When the truth is that you might not need the assistance.
Liberal patronization is worse than segregation. Give me an honest bigot. Because bigotry is external, but patronizing is internal.
The residents of Pruitt-Igoe went on a rent strike. Rents are supposed to pay for maintenance. People said, we can't afford these rents. Places built with Scotch tape and chewing gum or something, it's starting to fall down. And Pruitt-Igoe went straight downhill toward physical dilapidation and eventual demolition. You have the ghettoization in government properties of poor black people. Instead of their moving slowly up the socioeconomic ladder, in part through the ownership of property, they're on this whole other track, a dependency track.
We create the expectation that people are going to be cared for their life. That poverty is a life sentence.
Our government programs, and most of the people have I've been sitting back for a long time. My mother will be mad at me if I say this, but most of the programs come from the Democratic Party, and that's keep us in bondage. No, people need to step out of that, you know, and because that's what set up for failure.
Let's be clear. The progressive agenda is not the black agenda. That inherited culture that we had as a people, and I think when we lost that, we lost a lot. We reached a point where, as we failed to become educated in other things, it did not prevent us from still creating new generations. And so we had a generation that was, when I said substandard, I'm not talking about them as a human, as a person. I'm talking about substandard as relates to the skill set they needed to survive in the society that we're in. That as we fail in there and we created children, and then they fail to gain that subset that you have to survive in the society that we're in, and then they had children and they fail, well, boy, that's like taking the purest wine And each time you pour some in the glass, you water it down a little bit.
Over a period of years now, the man he's been down for something he did not create it, that he had to try to survive in. And the one thing about slavery, when we were free, nobody taught us how to be free. And so we're still struggling, even today, how to live a life of freedom.
Of course, Michael Brown was far too young to have ever seen Pruitt-Igoe, much less lived there. But the liberalism that spawned Pruitt-Igoe did not collapse with the buildings. Liberalism's faithlessness in blacks, yes, its unacknowledged bigotry toward them, was a vote of no confidence in their ability to agent their own uplift. By the time Michael was born, liberalism had suburbanized the Pruitt-Igoe model. It used Section 8 housing vouchers to generate suburban neighborhoods of low-priced apartment complexes, high unemployment, high crime, a transient population, drugs, gangs, terrible schools. Michael attended 4 high schools in 4 years. What William Julius Wilson charitably called an underclass. Liberalism's great sin was to steal responsibility for black problems away from black people, leaving them vulnerable to destructive social forces, such as the drug epidemic of the 70s and 80s. It was the suffering of blacks that justified liberalism's demand for power. But this only relegates blacks to permanent victimhood and alienates them from the power to uplift themselves.
The system becomes an enabler for your failure, because if someone could make your yeses mean yes and your no's mean no, then you basically a puppet. So you have mothers that have grown children that be like, well, my kid's a good kid. He doesn't break in anyone's house. He doesn't do drive-by shooting. He doesn't have tattoos all over his face. But those are actually things that you would think would be normal to not do. In the African-American community, not everyone, but a lot of us, is the exception and not the rule to move forward in life. And then you have the reinforcements. There are 3 things that affect your growth in the African-American community, and that's your home, that's your community, and that's your school. You come from a broken home, you get sent to a school that's ill-equipped, and then you come back to a neighborhood where it's dilapidated buildings. You have people that haven't set goals for themselves in life. So you begin to get fooled and tricked into believe that this is what being black is.
I only realized, long after the fact, that I grew up rather poor. We grew our own vegetables in vacant lots. The back alley was our playground. Yet adults were, for the most part, respected and obeyed. In the neighborhood, they were an unofficial authority. They agreed on what mattered and would correct you without permission from your parents. This was the authority that the government usurped in Pruitt-Igoe and wherever else people lived on public assistance. Effectively, it was an act of white supremacy. It was colonialism. This faithlessness in black authority is what gave us the world Michael Brown lived in. Perhaps the most insidious feature of liberalism after the 60s is that it dismisses individual responsibility as an agent of black uplift. Problems are always the fault of a systemic enemy, like racism. Individual responsibility is irrelevant. For example, let's ask a daring question, one that a group like Black Lives Matter would forbid. Is Michael Brown in any way responsible for his own death?
If Michael Brown had a sense of his own significance and his own importance, and he valued his life, he wouldn't take the chance of risking it. he wouldn't risk it.
What demons might have been at work within him when he arrived at that profoundly bad decision to slam his fist into the officer's face, to wrestle him for his gun, and to make that final fateful charge against Officer Wilson.
It's lethal to say to people that give them a personal exemption from any personal responsibility.
Yeah.
To say whatever you do that's injuring yourself is not your fault. Well, if it's not your fault, then how can you hold them responsible?
The liberalism that insists on Michael Brown being a victim of racism also makes him an invisible man. We have no chance to know what really ails him. And so liberalism invisibilizes all of Black America. It leaps over our actual problems to highlight racism as the source of all our ills. Modern liberalism does not like human complexity in its victims. It wants the lines of responsibility to be clear and simple, and always to point at the white world. Racism has always made the classic struggle between good faith and bad faith much harder for Blacks. How do you keep good faith in America when you are constantly told that you are oppressed? Still, good faith is the energy we need to build a good life. Bad faith is faithlessness, a disbelief in our power to make a life, so that we end up giving up even before starting.
He falls 7 times. He rises 7 times. He falls 7 times. He gets back up 7 times. I want to suggest, secondly, if you're going to get back up, you must learn that persistence pays off.
While in Chicago, I got to meet a pastor who worked with young people on this matter of faith. As if to challenge faithlessness itself, Pastor Corey Brooks had located his church in the heart of Woodlawn, one of Chicago's most violent neighborhoods.
We see it a lot with a lot of young guys in the neighborhood who don't value their life, and they don't know their self-worth. And a lot of it is a result of them not believing in themselves, or not having someone to believe in them, or not having someone to encourage them that you can do better, you can get to a level that somebody in your family did not get to. It just takes hard work and dedication. But if you don't have those messages going forward, it's hard for you to value life when everybody is shooting and killing.
He came to our meeting with the man who was a legend in Chicago, a former drug lord who had repented and found a new life in giving back to his community.
It was either go back to the streets and sell drugs or be with the pastor. So I got frustrated. I told the pastor, sir, I can't do this. He said, I'm gonna tell you something, man. If you go back to the streets, don't call my phone, don't come around me, and you're not gonna do it in this neighborhood. Find your new neighborhood to do it in. So I'm like, man, who do you think you're talking to? He said, I'm talking to you. And it kind of threw me back. I'm like, man, this dude talking to me like I'm a nobody.
It's easy to say the white man, and point the finger, when in reality, we need to take a very close look at ourselves. We focus on transformation of the person, and we're telling them, hey, educationally, you got to get it together. Economically, you got to get it together. Family and spiritually, you have to get it together. And you have to take responsibility.
I discovered there is no failure except in no longer trying. Ooh, I just said something right there. The only failure in life is when you fail to get back up again.
I'm known in Chicago and throughout a lot of states as the twin, or quote unquote the Bentley twin, because me and my twin brother, we drove Bentleys. I grew up out of the Calumet building, which is on 62nd and Calumet. As a child, I could say I had a unbalanced upcoming because my mom was living in the projects and I have a father that's from Africa. He's a foreigner. But he come over here as a kid and he made a great life for himself. But living between the projects and the little house with the white fence around it, which was my father, it was kind of off balance for me because I wasn't used to living the kind of lifestyle my father was living. He was very, very strict. It was about books and school. I seen my mom selling drugs, was selling weed. I see my sister selling weed. So by me seeing my mom and them doing what they were doing as a kid, I picked up on what they were doing, I wanted to do. I loved that project lifestyle. It was just a 16-story building, kids running everywhere. It was my kind of lifestyle. And I dropped out of school. I ran away from home. But all the time while the other guys was selling their drugs and taking their money, and they going to buy them nice clothes and smoking their marijuana, I was putting my money up under the mattress. And I was 13, 14 years old. Yeah, because I knew my father always, my father worked 90 jobs. I'm being honest, like my father was a teacher. He was a cab driver. He was running for office, alderman. He was just, he stayed busy. He stayed busy. And I didn't understand, like, man, this man, all he do is work.
While Varney was drawn into the life of crime, the gift his father gave him was personal agency. He believed he could be a self-made man.
And I took the money that I saved up, and I went and got with a gentleman that I knew. I said, hey, listen, I want to buy some from you. He's like, what are you talking about? When I showed him my money, he was surprised. And I took that product and I set it at a table and I fixed it up, because this is back then when the crack had just hit. And I fixed this drug up and I put it in these packs and I gathered me some kids, okay? And I gave them the packs. And when I gave them the packs, I became a boss at 15 years old. So now I'm in a situation where the police gonna either kill me or I'm gonna kill them.
Many of the failures originally designed to finish us off, if properly used, watch this, could be the very things that put us on top. Let me back up.
I'm running this building 24 hours a day. So anytime you come to this building, you'll be able to buy drugs. No matter what time of the day it is, you'll be able to buy drugs. And I'm running it by shifts. We doing 8-hour shifts. And I was selling heroin and I was selling crack. But between the two, I might make about $60,000, $70,000 a day. My father went to jail behind the things that I was doing back in 2004. He didn't do anything, but due to the fact that he was my father, they locked him up as well.
And when this farmer had a mule, this mule, it fell into a dry well. And the well was, it was real deep. And so he decided that since I can't rescue him, I don't want to see him starve to death. I don't want to see him just die in that hole like that. So the farmer decided that he was going to get a truck of trash and dirt. And he was going to every day for 3 days throw the trash and the dirt on the mule who had fell on the well, in the well.
Like 2015. Me coming home, I was lost. I'm gonna be honest, I just did 11 years of feds. I got some good street skills, but me coming home, my friends take me to the church. And I'm like, who I meet? Like, you meeting the pastor? I'm like, I don't want to talk to no pastor, bro, I just came home. They're like, no, you have to talk to him because he run a neighborhood now. I'm like, he don't run no neighborhood that I'm in. So me seeing the pastor, he was like, okay, I know who you are, heard a lot about you. Glad to see you home, but I'm new sheriff in town. Do you really know what you did to your community? I'm like, no, what? He said, you tore your community down. You fed them poison. Every individual that came and bought those drugs, it was slowly destroying their life.
When they were in the streets, They get a pack, get some drugs, they put a guy on. He start his own business, he start his own. So we're just saying, hey, take those same principles, transform them into something positive instead of something negative, but keep using those same business principles because principles work.
Something unusual happened with the first load of trash and dirt. He unloaded it in the well. The trash and the dirt fell on the mule, but the mule was a real smart mule. He shook it off, stepped on it, stepped on up. You missed it. Every day, they bring the trash and the dirt. They throw it in the hole on the mule. He shake it off, step on it, step on up higher. You missed it again. On the third day, they brought more trash, they brought more dirt, they threw it on the mule. He shook it off, stepped on it, and stepped on up higher. He kept stepping up so high that eventually he stepped out. Oh.
So you say, look, what you need to do is sit down, get your credit together. Let's get you a regular job. Let's get you stable, because if I can get you stable, if I can get you to listen, we can get some other kids to listen. A lot of these kids, they sitting in the house right now, smoking weed, and they passing to their mama. They smoking weed, and they passing to their father. Or they drinking, and they kids. As kids, this is what they doing. The problem is, no one's telling them, I love you. No one's hugging them. So now, in this community that we are in now, although these kids, and I'm not being distressed because I love all the kids like they my own, but these kids, they get up in the morning, they can't wait to get up in the morning, because the first thing they do when they get up in the morning, they don't brush their teeth, they don't wash their face, they don't do anything. They run straight up here to the pastor, because the pastor's everybody's daddy. I have the things that I want in life by working a real job, and I owe it all to the pastor. I really wish I would have listened to my father. Because now, thinking about it, my father was only trying to teach me all the right things in life.
Pastor Brooks and his message of good faith found a way ahead in the tenacity of an ordinary mule. We can't change the past, and we can't wait on justice. Let's go to work today. But for many, it is hard to let go of the past. Today is the 5th anniversary of Michael Brown's death. A year earlier, the protesters had demanded that the Ferguson market simply be given over to them. Now they wanted the newly elected county prosecutor, a black man, to reopen the Michael Brown shooting.
So I stand here today to discuss the unsatisfied with the way my son's death was handled. And I am demanding evidence to be reanalyzed and accountability to follow. So I'm requesting for Wesley Bell to reopen this case.
Reopen Michael Brown.
Here was grievance with no supporting evidence. Protest without the good faith that it would lead to anything.
My son was not the first to die by the hands of those who vowed to protect and serve. And sadly, he won't be the last.
As I watched this press conference, I had no idea that in 9 months, America would once again explode.
I'm about to die this thing. Relax. Man, I can't breathe in my face. Just get up. What do you want? I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my dick. I can't breathe.
Get up, get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
When I first saw the image of George Floyd on the news, I was shocked by the gruesomeness of the killing.
Do not. I think there's a right way to protest, and that's peacefully.
Fuck that, we tired, homie. We tired of that punk ass shit.
Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up!
everybody go it? No. But is everyone perfect? No. What I'm trying to say is, everyone feel like that. Everybody feel like that. That's all I gotta say.
Oh my God, they burned all this down. They burned all these buildings down. You call 911, they not coming. That's how crazy.
But I was not shocked by the world's reaction to this killing.
This is sad, man.
Unlike Michael Brown, George Floyd was a victim of indisputable police brutality.
George Floyd's story has been the story of black folks, because ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed to be in is you kept your knee on our neck.
As in Bensonhurst and Ferguson, Al Sharpton was once again taking an isolated atrocity and elevating it to the point of absolute systemic racism, where every black was George Floyd and every cop was Derek Chauvin. America's original sin is not slavery. It is simply the use of race as a means to power. Whether for good or ill, race is a corruption. Always. And it always turns one group into the convenience of another group.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
There were many peaceful protesters genuinely outraged and rightfully demanding police reforms.
But I think you can do better next time by doing the right thing.
No, it's a peaceful protest. It doesn't need to go that far.
But as these protests stretched from days into weeks into months, it became clear that this murder was less a tragedy and more an opportunity. For Black Lives Matter, Floyd and many others like him proved the systemic breadth of racism, and thus the systemic scale of redress due to blacks. But as with every poetic truth, this invites outrage at the wrong problems.
Hi everyone. As many of you know, my name is Lilith Sinclair. I'm an Afro-Indigenous, non-binary local organizer here in Portland, organizing for the abolition of not just the militarized police state, but also the United States as we know it.
As I watched these protests, it became strikingly clear to me how the civil rights era was a good faith movement. They wanted into America. Today's Black Lives Matter, at least the leadership, is a bad faith movement. Anti-individual, anti-nuclear family, anti-capitalism. They want to dismantle America. Yet when I was in Ferguson during the summer of 2019, I would often wake up to the news of another innocent black child killed.
Yet again, I have to stand here and tell you another child was killed.
A 7-year-old boy is dead.
A little girl was shot and killed.
Another weekend and another young victim, 13.
We've had so many children die, it's hard to remember all of their names. Caden Johnson, 2 years old. Kennedy Powell was just 3. 11-year-old Charnesia Keys was the most popular girl on her block. Eddie Hill was so gifted in school, he was allowed to skip a grade.
Black Lives Matter never showed up for these kids, or those in Chicago, Baltimore, New Orleans, or elsewhere.
A 7-year-old brother, Xavier, was set to begin 2nd grade today.
I ran outside, I saw the bullet right here and right here. And then that's when I tried to do CPR, but I forgot to hold his nose.
There was no power for blacks or innocence for whites to be had in these senseless deaths.
This marks the 17th child, that's 17 children killed by guns in the St. Louis area since May.
On the other hand, with the killing of George Floyd, America's entire history of racism came into play. By implication, all of white America stood accused. The power here was literally enormous. Whites around the entire Western world hit the streets in protest against this murder. These whites seem to say, as an anti-racist, I am guilty of racism. But this confession of guilt, as with all whites, past and present, is also their proclamation of racial innocence.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter!
This desperation among whites for innocence of racism often presses America into bad faith solutions to racial problems.
It's time to end the American experiment and then start all over again.
I think that we have to burn it down.
Do you think it's time to end the American experiment? Yes.
This was the desperation that fueled the liberalism of Pruitt-Igoe, the war on poverty, affirmative action, school busing, diversity this and diversity that. This grab for entitlements continues to this day. These programs give white America moral legitimacy, or at least the illusion of it, even as they utterly fail to help the black underclass.
That don't have nothing to do with us. What you gonna do if you're 90 years old and you out there going, hey, and then you throw a bomb, some kid throw a bomb in there, trying to be cute, like that. And then when everybody gets to go home, we stay black, homie, and we get blamed for your Black Lives Matter.
White guilt's corruption is that it is always self-referential. It needs blacks to be blacks rather than human beings. And it leaves us with a liberalism that is actually an ideology of white innocence. I was wrong. I thought the oppression of black Americans was over with. It is not. The liberalism that came out of the 60s has proven to be a more insidious oppression than either slavery or Jim Crow segregation. Those oppressions confined your person. Liberalism wants your very soul. It wants you to be a grateful and mindless captive, but a captive nonetheless. This is the land where my family once lived as slaves. This is also the land where my family was set free. Camp Nelson, Kentucky. This is the Negro cemetery where many of my family are buried. This is my Aunt Eva. She used to come and visit us in Chicago on the Greyhound bus, and she always had a pet raccoon on a leash. Robert Steele, it's my uncle. He was pretty famous. He played the mandolin in a musical group that got a lot of attention. Here's the school my father went to as a little boy. During the Civil War, many of his first students were the children of black soldiers who fought for the Union in exchange for their freedom. I find the refugees manifesting an almost universal desire to learn, and that they do make rapid progress. I feel that it is blessed to labor with such people. John G. Fee, 1865. These blacks seized the margin of freedom open to them, narrow as it might have been, and made meaningful lives, my father among them. And they had to do this even as Jim Crow was on the rise. Lynchings were on the rise. Every effort was being made in the South and beyond to repress these newly free people.
Adventures that the pastor is working on.
I saw this same truth during my time with Pastor Brooks and Barney Volker in Chicago.
We're gonna step in and we're gonna watch our step. It's one of the projects the pastor took on, and he brought some of the young guys in to come in and teach them, help them learn a trade. Knock them back in or pull them out.
Far from the limelight of Al Sharpton and Black Lives Matter, and despite horrible gang violence and poverty, these men work every day at the often unglamorous labor of character building.
I'm 20, and hopefully by the time I'm 30 or 35, maybe I could do the same thing as the pastor doing, helping other young men do stuff like this and go farther in life instead of just me. Because me personally, I was in and out of jail, and then I had my son, and he changed my life.
I wonder what would have happened if Michael Brown had had the good fortune to meet Pastor Brooks.
So if you do something positive, because you did enough negative, you do something positive, it'll rub down to the next person. So this is what they basically doing. This is becoming a trend now. Like, he's a great role model for the neighborhood as well as him. Just because we from this community, everybody look down on us like we don't have out. It's out. You just have to take what you got, deal with it for now, and work your way out.
These young men remind me of my father. He believed in the transformative magic of work. Like so many cities after the race riots of the 60s, Ferguson is worse off today than before the shooting of Michael Brown. Homeowners, many of them black, struggle with dwindling property values. Nearby schools continue to perform poorly. There are fewer police officers, and crime is up. A young man walked past me on Canfield Drive, and literally 10 minutes later was shot dead. And yet I still saw signs of hope. One of the most inspirational people I met was Miss Queen.
Y'all did wonderful. I'm so proud of you guys. I know my babies were smart.
Who tackles poverty, whether with kids inside a local church or out in the field with families down on their luck.
I know they're good people, and I know they care for each other, and I know they want help. And that's why this young man now, he's going to school. He's going to get his GED. It's a beautiful family here, and I want to see him in the system, in jail, or in homes or anything. We go out in the field every day. A lot of people don't want to go in the field because they think, I guess you get dirty out here, but I'm okay. But we on the bang, we got water and soap. We go home and take a bath, Because it starts from home. It starts from home. I tell people all the time, I say, you got to go inside the home and see it's a problem in the home. That's why these kids are killing each other. There's no love and unity in the home. When they get that the home, they'll stop,
I want to raise my kids better than I was raised, and I don't want my kids on the street like I was. I want my kids to get things that I never got before. I want my kids to be better than me. I want to be better than my mama. Everybody want their kids to be better than me.
it's not about color at all. You know, it's about making a difference and making a positive difference in somebody's life. You know,
We go back to school.
Right.
Oh, little child. You know, she got a little story about how she came to us. She was getting the. Want to tell your story?
I got bullied at school about my color and stuff. Miss Queen started tutoring me, and Miss Queen, Miss Nikki, been there ever since. She had a whole school for a whole bunch of children, and I just love her to death. I don't know what to say really. Helping other people makes me happy. Seeing other people helping other people makes me happy. Sometimes they have tears through my eyes, and just God just been everywhere helping them.
My mother used to have a garden, and so, you know, so just plant a seed and see that grow and feed the whole family with that. You know, my mother did it all the time.
Let's go show Miss Nikki.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Let's go.
The fairy. Always plan for the next day. And always keep your hopes and your dream. You know, don't ever give up on it. You know, because it's possible. Especially through God. I believe in God, and I know it's possible. Never give us always tomorrow. Always tomorrow.
Though my father was a civil rights activist all his adult life, he was never a captive of liberalism. He went only to the 3rd grade in school. When he was 8, his father was killed in a wagon accident. His mother died when he was 12. He lived for 2 years in the back of a white farmer's barn. The farmer's son brought him food at night. His brothers and sisters were dispersed and no better off than him. Jim Crow segregation reigned everywhere. At 14, he took off for the North. It was an existential circumstance, a man alone in an indifferent world. My father made a meaningful life because he never practiced America's original sin. He favored character over race as a means to power.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Segregation.